You describe the death experience?
The death experience does, in fact, vary to some extent from one individual to another. But there is, for the most part, a universal experience. And I'm certain that your question refers to that universal experience that can be anticipated by all. First of all, at the moment that the human life or existence ceases, at that very moment, there is also a cessation, as sudden and as abrupt, and all human life ends suddenly and abruptly. There is an ending to any human fear that exists in the mind. That ending of fear immediately is replaced by a sense of euphoria, a sense of relief, which expands so rapidly that it is impossible for the human to comprehend the great sense and rush of joy that is experienced. From that point on, there is a variance depending on some conditioning, depending on the level of evolvement or development or understanding awareness of the spirit intelligence that you call spirit or soul. However, essentially, it appears to travel through space, a sense of traveling through space, and an atmosphere, an ambiance of great love, of great approval, of total security. A welcoming, a sense of anticipation, a complete conviction that this is a journey of total success. Slowly it broadens. There becomes an identity, the reason for the sense of joy, the reason for the sense of welcoming, which is only experienced before coming into focus. And it is a sense of focus, not unlike bringing a fuzzy image in camera into clear and precise lines. Entities are recognized that existed in the current or the previous life, the human life just left, and other lives, entities that existed in those lives that were meaningful, where there was a love relationship, a giving and taking in principle, a sharing. Those entities that exist in the spirit or astral world are indeed present, sometimes in vast numbers, if in fact it is a spirit entity being welcomed that has lived many, many, many lives. Sometimes fewer numbers, not only because it would be, in the human sense, a younger soul, but also sometimes because a series of lives have been lived out with only a precious handful of close loved ones in that life. Whatever the cause, the numbers have no bearing whatsoever on the sense of total welcome and love. Also, there is a projection that overall, the love that exists is emanating from a source so close at hand that it seems, again, in the human sense, and this is extremely difficult to describe because it's beyond the comprehension of the human, but there is a sense that one is in God's presence. The sense of love never leaves, ever, during the entire existence in spirit world. There are variations and there are refinements. The circumstances of the human passing are often responsible for these variations. There have been many occasions where spirit intelligence is momentarily aware of the human scene they have just been released from, particularly in terms of accidental death or sudden death as a result of a sudden and abrupt failure of vital human organs, or an accidental death, or death in battlefield. On those occasions, very often, spirit entity is given an opportunity to recognize and views the human scene, so that the departure is, in a sense, gentler. It's never a tugging or tearing. It is always a gentle departure. But most often, the cessation of life is the end of any awareness of the human existence for, in human terms, a long period of time, sometimes years, usually months.
Can you describe what existence is like and how the learning experience happens in the period from death to rebirth?
From death to rebirth, which of course is the life in the astral, in spirit world. The learning experience at that time is in fact beyond comprehension. And I would point out to you that no human that is valid and stable and sane has ever made the attempt or made the suggestion that they have the capacity to remember the spirit life. Any claims to that effect are false, are fraudulent, or they are the product of at least a hysterical mind. It is beyond the human comprehension to understand the learning experience. I can tell you, however, that the principle of learning involved is nothing more than the absorption of an intensity of love, of compassion, of awareness of the Supreme Being for all that He has created. All spirit entities are exposed to, and in fact bathed in that light and love that exists. It is very much, and in fact the only pale reflection that exists on earth is that of the mother, devoted with heart full, caring for the helpless infant. There is no other experience that could even bring to the human mind a concept. The infant, the human infant, is aware of and in fact absorbs that love when it is bestowed by a loving mother. So it is in the spirit world. Spirit entities absorb the love from the Supreme Being, and also they absorb the lessons that this love generates and produces. For God's love generates nothing but the positive, generates nothing but more love. It feeds upon itself, and all in spirit world are privy to that experience. All are exposed. There is no expression of God's love that is not shared to some extent by all in spirit world. When I say to some extent, that implies a degree, and of course that is true. The absorption, the capacity to absorb and to benefit, is predicated on the degree of awareness which is in direct proportion to the learning experience. Usually, how old in human terms, how many lives has the soul in fact experienced through coexistence? That usually is the determining factor, but not always. There are some, and this you would know well, there are some who have experienced precious few human lives, and each of them would end, and then the existence from human death to human rebirth would in fact be of the highest nature. They are individuals, both in the spiritual sense and in the human sense, are extremely rare. But they do exist, they have existed in history, and usually they are identified. They are always identified by those in the human life that are aware and understanding. The Hindus call them avatars.
Just one more question. Inasmuch as the Supreme Being could have created all humans perfect, what's the purpose in making the learning experience so difficult and so endless?
Extremely difficult question to answer. And because you have posed an alternative to the condition that exists, that is obviously more attractive to the human sense. The reason why it need not be, and that really is your question, why do we have to, in the human sense, experience such difficulty, such pain, in order to refine and develop and grow closer to God in the spiritual sense? Basically is your question. Why does not God, or why did not God endow man with a totally and completely enlightened soul or spirit? For the same reason that a good carpenter much prefers to build from the ground up rather than to order a mail-order house, constructed and built by the hands of others in some remote factory. That might be a painful analogy, but it is an accurate one. Secondly, there is no human life, however brief, however long, whatever the circumstances, there is none that is not brought into focus and indeed judged by that person who has experienced the human life. At some time, toward the end of it, there is a clear, positive understanding and satisfaction with the course and the events and the ultimate results of the human life. We are constantly judging, in the human sense, the problems and envying the successes of others. But I tell you that individually, before you leave the human life, you will have at least a glimpse and a moment of contentment that it was worthwhile. It is only harsh while you're going through it. It's delightful once you've made the trip. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat, but not entirely. But it is an answer.
It's a thorny question, and I'm not sitting in judgment, nor am I withholding. I can offer you no more,
I just wondered,
for there is no more available that would satisfy the curiosity.
Just to follow up on this, the carpenter analogy. What I'm wondering is why the carpenter doesn't do the best work he can. If he can make a perfect table, why make an imperfect one?
Wouldn't that deprive of our individual satisfaction, Dr. Gillis?
That is the product. The imperfections in the human existence are the product of the human mind, not of the spiritual self. Spirit is not in any way responsible for the imperfections of the human existence. Those are choices that the human mind makes. These are in fact a reflection of human ego, and nothing but human ego. Now, that is not to say that the human ego is in fact a force sufficient to thwart spirit. It is not. But it is a force sufficient to attack and sometimes destroy the human self. Perhaps we should have pointed out, and we did refer earlier to the fact that spirit coexists with the human self. That is, in fact, the truth. It is a coexistence, but it is of a parallel nature. A parallel nature. The spiritual self functions as an energy and as an intelligence. The human self functions in the human physical material realm. The two coexist, but as parallel lines. They don't cross. The spiritual self can and does affect the human existence when one chooses to allow it to happen, or when one goes to it for help out of sweet and true unauthentic surrender to Spirit or God. However, the human physical self has no capacity whatsoever to affect the spiritual self. Human disease is not experienced by spirit, of course, nor can any flaw in the human behavior or the human existence affect the spiritual self. The one is perfect, and the other one is imperfect, doomed to imperfection. And there is your question. Why, in fact, is it doomed to imperfection? Why does the human experience have to be, in a sense, in conflict with the spiritual self? And the only answer to that is the conflict does indeed refine the spiritual self. There seems to be an enigma in the statement that we have a perfection of spirit and yet we strive to improve it. How can one improve perfection? Well, that improvement really is in an awareness of the perfection. Most humans, no matter how enlightened, no matter how saintly, fail to recognize the total perfection of their spiritual being. And it takes more than one life to learn it. When you have learned it, you exist only as spirit, no longer as human.